let's see, it was 1918, and moved to New York. And he lived in New York, mostly in the Upper West Side of New York, for about 22 years. So this is a composer who took this incredible Russian tradition that really started for him with Tchaikovsky and brought that to the United States. But let me talk, first of all, about Rachmaninoff, the pianist, because you really kind of have to understand something about Rachmaninoff, the pianist, to appreciate the idea and the concept of Rachmaninoff, the composer. Rachmaninoff famously had incredibly large hands. If you actually go onto YouTube and type in Rachmaninoff had large hands, there is a very funny video from a comedy group called the Goodisman and Jew, in which they actually use a large 2x4 with special cutouts on it so that the pianist can actually play all the chords on the piano that Rachmaninoff wrote, because most pianists have a very hard time playing them. And it's one of the reasons we consider his music so insanely difficult to play, is that he wrote a lot of this music for himself. He was an astounding pianist. He had a sense of precision at the piano. He loved to use staccato textures, which is something that modern day pianists often shy away from, myself included. We worry that it doesn't sound very musical. Rachmaninoff had a way of always making those things sound musical, and he had an astounding level of technical facility. He mostly performed his own music for many years. It was a way of promoting himself as a composer. But he eventually started playing the music of other composers, and eventually left a very large legacy on RCA Records of his own performances, not only of his own music, but of music of Beethoven, of much of Chopin, and many other, especially of the classic and romantic composers. And it isn't just that Rachmaninoff was a great pianist, and because we think of him so much now as a composer. His music is performed all the time by pianists, by orchestras all the time. Rachmaninoff was one of the greatest of all pianists. And I think it's really important to remember that because, again, he wrote music that he could play and really set the bar higher than most of us are even willing to try to achieve that level. It was just absolutely extraordinary. Rachmaninoff said an interesting thing when he was asked about being an interpreter of music and being a composer as a performer. And he very specifically said, he didn't like to be interviewed, he didn't speak a whole lot about himself, but he did say, I don't interpret music the way that other pianists interpret music. I perform this music and I experience it as a composer. And he said that, you know, if he was playing the music of Chopin, he really wanted to understand how to be inside Chopin's head and play that music as if it was that composer himself playing the music. And that was very much Rachmaninoff's sort of ethos about performing. And so that's also an important thing to realize when you hear his music, which is filled with so much romantic expression, that, you know, he really just wanted to play the music as if it was coming directly from the composer. He famously said to one pianist, please don't sweeten my music so much, it has plenty of sugar already. And you know that when you hear the music, the astoundingly beautiful aspects of his music. So before I get into that, just an example of Rachmaninoff, the concert pianist, but also promoting himself as a composer. His first tour of the United States was in 1909, and he performed with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and he thought, you know, I'm going to write a piano concerto for this occasion. It'll be my third concerto, and those of you who are familiar with Rachmaninoff Third, you know that it's been the subject of movies. It's said to have driven pianists insane. It is an astoundingly difficult work. I've played it, and every time I play it, I'm very nervous. I start preparing, 8 months in advance. I just find it the most difficult of all the piano concertos that I play. That's the piece that he wrote just quickly so that he could have something to debut with the Boston Symphony. Several weeks later, he went to New York. He played that same concerto, the third concerto, getting its second ever performance in public with Rachmaninoff at the piano, Gustav Mahler conducting the New York Symphony. So, I mean, that's the beginning of that piece, but that gives you an idea of what sort of a pianist Rachmaninoff was. So, if we're going to talk about what kind of a composer he was, and you're going to hear such a great variety of his compositional output tonight, think for a moment what it must have felt like. So, in 1897, Rachmaninoff thought, okay, I'm clearly influenced by not only Tchaikovsky, but his teachers that included Siloty, Taneyev. I mean, he was learning from the best and very much absorbing their styles early on in his very earliest works. You can hear those influences in, for example, his first piano concerto. But he discovered how much he loved writing for full orchestra, so he wrote his first symphony. It was given its premiere, and it got possibly the worst reviews that any composer has ever gotten for a piece of music. It was César Cui who wrote the review. Among the things he said was, even dogs in hell would be outraged at hearing, I mean,